I would say that living in stress is living in survival, and stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis. Stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. The stress response is what the body innately does to return itself back to balance. The problem is that if you keep turning on that fight or flight system, you keep turning on that emergency system, you'll actually cause people to stay out of balance, and that imbalance becomes the new balance, and they're headed for some type of disease, some type of breakdown. No organism can tolerate emergency mode for an extended period of time, and when you're in survival and that primitive system is switched on, it's really about the self. When you're in survival, you have to take care of yourself. So the emotions of anger and hostility and aggression and competition and frustration and resentment and envy and jealousy and insecurity and fear and anxiety and hopelessness and powerlessness and depression and pain and suffering, guilt and shame are all derived from the hormones of stress, and psychology calls them normal human states of consciousness. Those are altered states of consciousness. And when we're in that state, when we're living in survival, we experience separation. We divide in a lot of ways. And so there's biology that goes along with that, and the hormones of stress heighten the senses and cause us to become materialists. And now when we're in lack or separation, we force outcomes, we control outcomes, we fight for outcomes, we compete for outcomes, we manipulate outcomes. In a lot of ways, we turn into more of a primitive self. So it's hard to change that, especially when you don't have enough money, or you just lost your job, or you just ended a relationship, or your best friend passed. It's really hard to move beyond those emotional states. And so I think that teaching people how to change those emotional states and move out of those are really important. And 75 to 90% of every person that goes to a healthcare facility in the Western world goes in because of psychological or emotional stress. That's 8 or 9 out of 10. And emotional stress and psychological stress are the ones that tend to be the most harmful. Because if it's not T-Rex that's chasing you, but it's your coworker in the next cubicle, what was once very adaptive becomes very maladaptive. And the rush of those adrenal hormones become kind of addictive to people. And they use the problems, they use the conditions in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that emotion. They need their enemy to feel hatred. And if their enemy died, they'd still feel hatred, or they'd find another one. They need the bad relationship, they need the bad job in order to feel, and that's why it's hard to change. And people become addicted to the life they don't even like. And so if you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, by thinking about your problems, then that's the truth. You can become addicted to your own thoughts. And if the long-term effects of the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease, your thoughts can make you sick. And then the question is, if your thoughts could make you sick, can your thoughts make you well? And we're actually discovering that that's absolutely possible. So then teaching people then a little bit about how to manage their emotional state and to self-regulate, I think is a great gift for people, because when they begin to break an addiction to any emotion or the conditioning of any emotion, there's going to be cravings that go on just like any addict there, and many people overdose and many people have bad trips. And so when they start changing and the body's craving those familiar emotions, the body starts signaling the brain, of memories, or to think certain ways and to make certain choices, do certain things, crave certain experiences just to feel that same emotion. And people say, well, this feels right. No, that feels familiar. That really feels familiar. And many people will tell the story of why they feel that way based on some past experience. And it's usually not in the recent past. It's usually many years ago.
Like a toxic relationship or something.
Whatever that is. And so they're basically saying, I had an event in my life, and since that event, I'm still living by the same emotion and I haven't been able to change. And they'll tell the story of that past. And in psychology, the latest research on memory shows that 50% of that story isn't even the truth. They're making it up because they don't have the same brain as they had then. And so then people are reliving a miserable life they never even had just to excuse themselves from changing. And they embellish the stories so that it sounds really hard to change. So what is that point then for a person when they say, the only person that this emotion of hatred or anger or frustration or resentment, the only person that this is hurting is me? Because those chemicals are down-regulating genes and creating disease. And a person finally really realizes that, and they really decide to change. When they overcome the emotion, the memory without the emotion is called wisdom. And that's the name of the game in three-dimensional reality. Now they're ready for a new experience. It's not reliving the past. You don't need to. You don't need to talk about it. All you need to do is overcome the emotion. When you overcome the emotion, you're free from the past. You can see it from a greater level of consciousness. And that's when a person, so many times when they truly change, they'll say this. We've seen it over and over again. They reach that point where they finally break through, and some of them have had some really difficult pasts. They'll say, I would not want to change one thing in my past because it brought me to this moment. That's the moment the past no longer exists. And they can look at their betrayers and see it all had to happen for that moment. And now they're free.